You're listening to the Cinema Snarks podcast. I'm Larry,
And I'm Ren.
and today we are going to tell you how we really feel about challengers and the resurgence of sexiness in film. All right, Ren, we're back. We are back again with challengers, the latest
We liked challengers.
excursion into
Full
the movie
disclosure, Ren
theater.
did not like the other very popular, sexy Luca Guadagnino. Yes. But and like my little heart is like, I should love everything an Italian filmmaker is going to make. But I did not like Call Me by Your Name. My issue with Calling Me by Your Name, of course, was that I thought it was a little bit odd that we were okay with the grooming of a young gay man in a way that we wouldn't be if it was a girl, especially like the same year that all the Kevin Spacey stuff came out. So that I found a little bit ick, but Challengers, no ick here. Really enjoyed the complicated nature of the whole romantic and sexual relationships of all three characters. Lots of very strong
Oh.
poly vibes, lots of strong pansexual vibes, which I think is all like very modern and very, very of the day. And I think it's a really fun, complex way to examine human sexuality.
Now, I'm on the opposite end, I have to admit. Call Me by Your Name is like one of my favorite things of all time. I adore it. I think it's beautiful. It did, especially with Army Hammer himself. It's
Larry,
definitely
did you
it's aged
strategically place
weird.
those sexy man
Yes.
pictures behind you for this
I also
read?
have this my sexy Funko Pops. We've got the Jeff Goldblum and Deadpool, and then the like shirtless, chained up by lightning Chris Hemsworth Funko Pops behind me. So it's a sexiness
Sexy.
background.
Love it.
I
Love it.
couldn't theme this because the Avalanche play, so gotta wrap my
Right,
sports.
right, right.
But I had to theme the background to what we were
Get your
talking about.
background themed.
So yeah, but Call Me by Your Name with the author of the book also, and Army Hammer being outside influences that have undergone some controversies, and then it's always been a topic on how it was handled with the age gap business. But I'm sorry, I love it. It just is what it
It's
is.
okay.
It's
You're
still
not the only one
including
who's like, I don't give a shit.
challengers.
I love it.
Yeah,
And
including
there's,
challengers. Call Me by Your Name is still my
yeah,
favorite
there's
of
certainly
the
other movies that
films.
I'm like, I don't give a shit. I love it. Like, I know there's lots of actors involved with Baby Driver that are like, of
Kevin Spacey
problematic,
himself.
but I don't care. I love it.
But I've seen them all. Ren only has the two films
Yeah.
for Luca's filmography. I would say Luca Guadagnino, particularly when he has males in his film, because Suspiria is a very female heavy film. There's not many men in that film, period. So
To be clear, I have seen the original Suspiria. This is I think we've made it very clear that Larry have our like and I have our delineated interests in film. Like I'm more like old school film, the classics, and he's like every single new release, good or bad, he's gonna fucking see it.
it's true. And this new one, obviously, it was a good fit for Luca. He's Italian. Suspiria is like the Italian horror age. It was one of the
Yeah,
grandfathers of that whole age of horror
yeah.
way back when. And then we had Bones and All, the reuniting of Timothy Chalamet with Luca Guadagnino in a very weird, sexy horror cannibalism movie.
I might like that.
I mean,
I like weird, sexy horror.
and once again, there's no age gap because it's Timothy Chalamet with Taylor Russell. They're both like in their early 20s, I believe. Yeah, I think you might like Bones and All. I think you also will probably like the new Suspiria. I think it's pretty faithful. Just
It's
upgrade
been
of
on my list forever. It's really because it's on Amazon all the time. It's like
yeah.
it falls to the bottom. It's like, all right, I'll get to that one eventually. That'll be there for forever. I
Probably
can get to
Dakota
these ones that
Johnson's
are gonna.
best performance to date is in that
It,
movie. She's really good. And
oh,
Tilda Swinton gets to play a man and a woman in that movie.
I
She
do love
does a
me
dual
some Tilda
role.
Swinton living in her weirdo.
She gets to be weird as per usual. So by and large, outside of, the problematic natures of Call Me by Your Name, I think you would like Luca's just entire
I
filmography.
mean,
I have
there's
to admit.
a lot about Call Me by Your Name that I really enjoyed. Like I think the cinematography is
Yeah.
really gorgeous. I mean, I generally don't really like Armie Hammer. I never really liked him as a performer. He's not bad in that film, and like Timothy Chalamet.
Oh,
Oh, the acting
so good.
performances were decent.
Well, Challengers is kind of the culmination of both. It really feels like a next step for Luca
Everyone is of
Guadagnino.
the same age, which is very exciting.
All, yes, they're all at least in the same realm. And in the movie, they are literally all 17. And it is the latest in this new wave of the reintroduction of sexuality and sensuality in film that we've been longing for a decade, at least some of us. Some other people, I think, are
Longing
still
for
not on
it.
board. But let's talk about Challengers as a film before we jump into the larger discussion. So we have Zendaya, who is having a year. She is in two of the most widely acclaimed movies of 2024 thus far, with Dune Part 2 and now Challengers, two very different performances and characters for her as well,
Side
which,
note, did you know she's also like on the board of the Met for like
oh,
the
well,
Met
yes.
Gala?
She was a co-chair with Chris Hemsworth.
Sure, that's what it is. Chris Hemsworth was a co-chair. What was his outfit? That was so boring for a co-chair. Get
I
out of
was,
here. All right.
yeah,
Continuing on
Jennifer.
Zendaya, she's a goddess.
I was very disappointed in my man. And Tom Ford, you gay man, fashion designer, were the one who put him in a literal just beige suit to go
Yeah,
to the Met
we could
Gala.
have a whole side rant about the Met Gala outfits and what was and
But
was not
listen,
acceptable, but
if
that's
there's
another
two
podcast.
people, we'll just talk about it. If there's two people who are always going to show up to the Met Gala and come to impress every time, it's Blake Lively, who was not there this year, and
Oh,
Zendaya, who
yeah,
killed it yet again, as she always does
yeah,
in any red carpet. But
yeah.
she's having herself a year, and she is with Perpetual playing a gay or gay adjacent man, Josh O'Connor, and Mike Feist, who is pretty young in his career. The only thing I had ever seen him in previous to this was Steven Spielberg's remake of West Side Story, and now this. So wasn't too familiar with Mike, but I'm very familiar now. Okay, because I came out of this fan,
Getting very
a
extra
fan.
familiar.
Yes.
One of the things I really enjoyed about the casting for the film was that these two guys are really perfectly sexy opposites, right? Like one is the like blonde, sleek, right? Like there's a scene where they're in a sauna, so you see them both shirtless. One is like this perfect, shining, glistening, hairless, pale, gorgeous man. And then the other one is like this furry, kind of dirty, dark-haired, scruffy dude. And I'm curious what your personal preferences are on it,
And
Larry.
just looking at them in that sauna, you would kind of think Mike Feist is the one who continues to play gay men, but it's actually the rugged, like hairy one that continues to just play gay men in almost every project he does. So that's
Except for The
interesting.
Crown. That's where I first saw
Except for The
him. He
Crown.
plays the young Charles.
I first saw him in God's Own Country, which he plays like this farmer dude who is struggling, who kind of gets with this other rugged dude who comes to his farm. I definitely am team Mike Feist. I'm sorry. That's
That's okay. I think I'm
man.
probably team Josh O'Connor. That's
I can
just
see it.
and that's good, right? Like
Yeah,
there's something in there for everyone. Like I'm not
for
gonna say
everyone.
that Mike Feist is not a very good looking man, but the like furry kind of dirty dude does it for me. I don't know.
And like they say several times in this movie, then you have Zendaya, who's just everyone's type.
Yes.
Just
I'm in
everyone
love with Zendaya. It's
is
true.
in love with this woman. And somebody said it. We're so happy that Luca Guadagnino finally let Zendaya just be pretty. To just finally,
Yeah.
because all of the films she's been taking recently kind of want to like minimalize just like the prettiness of her, a little bit more like down to
Even
earth girl.
her role on Euphoria, she's kind of a mess.
Yeah,
That's
she's like a
kind of
drug
her.
addict, like a hot
Yeah.
mess all the time. She never gets to just look glamorous. And
Hmm.
particularly, there's this scene on this beach where she's talking to the two of them in this like blue dress, where she just looks
She's literally, yeah,
absolutely
the wind is in her hair, and it's just
just
she's a goddess.
stunning. Like you're like, wow, how do you get to be
And
this perfect looking? I don't
And
understand.
yeah, and the costumes on her were also just like incredible. My favorite personally was the one that she wears during the tennis match, where she's right in the middle. It's kind of the tennis match is the framing device for the whole film. They basically kind of like at each you're gonna need to help me with the terminology here. I would say that one of the big things that I said about the movie after it came out is I think I would have enjoyed that like 10% more if I knew anything about tennis. But it did seem like the structure of the film was broken up
Yeah.
by the structure of a tennis match, which I think is an interesting way to lay it out as a film. And, sometimes it feels like filmmakers do the like fast forward back to they like do the
Yeah.
breaking up timeline to create a mystery where there otherwise would not be one. And it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine where it's like it's to keep people engaged when your story is actually not that interesting by just like not giving them information. Whereas in this case, it actually broke it up in an interesting structural way and then it pretty much gives it to you the whole story of how they are intertwined from beginning to end, which is what I want in a love story, in a romance, in a I would call this a love story. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a very
Salacious.
complicated love story. It's not, I actually think it's more of a love story than a romance because I
Yes.
feel like a romance has like those specific beats and expectations. This one is all up in the complications of love and those just like feelings and how they can be not what you expect them or want them to be and how they all kind of play out.
And what I love is that it is literally, so even if they don't fully lean into the more poly nature of what we could have, it really feels like a three-way love story constantly
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
no matter what's happening, you're really focusing on the connection she has with each of these men separately, how she has it with them together, and how they have their own
Yeah.
like love story sans her, like without her even in the picture. So it just is like this really interesting
And I
mix.
really appreciated the way that the screenwriter and the director approached the complications of this polyamorous relationship. The traditional way of viewing it is that the person who sleeps with more than one person is the monster, is cheating, is like but this movie really looks at like it's not a love triangle in the traditional way. It's like these two guys have a love going on and then they each have their own relationship with her. So it is like a legitimate triangle, which I think is really interesting because if you talk to the polyamorous community, one of the like biggest things that happens is that people want to open up their relationship and they're looking for a third. And that's like the wrong thing to do. That's not what you're supposed to do. That is like you're not you're to be like looking for an accessory to your current relationship. You like that it leads to drama and it leads to like dehumanization of this third person that becomes again like a sex toy, an accessory, like this person that you think is going to enhance your current established relationship. And this one really did build like said in if you go to the polyamorous communities, when you have a three-way relationship, it's actually four different relationships. So it's person one with person one with it's actually a whole bunch of them, person with person three and person two, and then it's all three of
Yeah.
them together. So it's very complicated and I think that this movie actually does a pretty solid job of like
Yeah.
an introductory course in it, right? Let's not polyamorous. Like let's be clear, there's not ethical non-monogamy happening here
No.
in this film, but it does start to play with the ideas behind it in a very honest way. And I could see these characters eventually evolving into some
Yeah.
understanding of like love is not a finite resource and relationships are complicated and I don't it doesn't have to be all or nothing and maybe I get something from this person that I don't get from this person and that's okay and maybe we can all be happy together maybe I don't know I think in a
Yeah.
I don't personally see a happy ending coming out at the end of this film but I think that might be the indication of it so
I think it all
um
kind of falls on the crux that we're also dealing with some characters that a lot of flawed characters, which is also a lot more fun. None of these characters
Yes.
are pristine and perfect.
They're flawed
Uh
without being villains. Like one of the
yeah.
things that I really appreciated is that Zendaya and well, sorry, Tashi and Art. So Art is the Mike Feist. It's they have a daughter together. They end up married, and you see Tashi's mother is basically traveling around with them while they're touring. They're these like tennis superstars, and she takes care of their daughter. And it creates such a humanness to Tashi's character so that she's not just this like psychotic, driven tennis monster who is just obsessed with winning.
Yeah.
She's a real person that like cares about her mommy and wants her mommy around and is like her mommy loves her and
Yeah.
loves their grandchild and it just creates like this fully fleshed out character. And it's such a great way to do it. Like they talk about that like show don't tell sort of thing all the
Yeah.
time in screenwriting and in playwriting. And that's a great way to show us she's not a
This whole
bad
movie.
person.
I think
She's
we
a
walked
she's a
out of it saying it. This movie is like a really good course of show don't tell.
yeah,
Like they
yeah, especially yeah, the very last scene of the movie, there are no lines. It is 100% show, and I can just see film professors from now until the end, until someone else does something
yeah.
even better, showing that scene to be like, this is what we mean by show don't tell.
But
Look
I
how
think
much is happening between these characters without a
so
word being spoken.
but yeah, I think her character easily could have been the villain
The
of this
villain.
movie. It like if they hadn't handled it so well to create an actual complex human, this character on paper could easily fall into like this harlot.
Yeah.
Oh, she's just doing whatever. She even says I did become a homewrecker, because she kind of wrecks their relationship with one another. And once
Yeah.
again, I love that they bring it back to that because her character kind of perceives what's going on between these two
Yeah.
more than they perceive it themselves. Literally, the moment she meets them, because she's
Yes.
in her first interaction, it's like, so what's going on with you two? And then we get that like iconic scene where it's like a three-way makeout, and she
Yes.
pulls herself
Which
back
I
from it.
live for. It was like just such an incredible moment. I mean, I can't think of any other scenes in which a woman in a moment is like in the dominant position in a sexually charged scene and she just like leans back and like observes what she has done. It was like, we talk a lot about like boss bitches. I was, doing some research for the podcast and I listened to like some really weird takes on it. But there
Oh.
was some, kind of douchey dude was talking about how there's not sex in films anymore because everybody has to be a girl boss. And I'm like, but this is like an excellent example of like how a woman can be an empowered girl boss and also fucking sexy, like empowered and in charge of her sexuality and using it, but not as a tool. The sex for her it isn't really a tool, I don't think, in this
Yeah.
film. It really becomes, it's just like a thing that she likes to do. It's interesting that you said that like the Tashi character could be perceived as the villain because one of the articles that I read said that Patrick could be moved as the villain because he's the one who's like got into her head right before she messed up
Yeah.
her knee and that screwed up her career. So, it really, that is kind of one of the nice things about it is that it's like, again, it's really complicated. And so
And
depending on who
even
you
in
talk
that
to,
vein, Art is
it
the
would,
one who started the drama between them, which led
yeah.
to the
And then
fight,
Art tries to steal his girlfriend. Yeah. So they're all not good people. They're all, and I don't want to say that they're not good people
But they
because
all
I
do
think actually
questionable
the other
things.
thing is they are all good people. You
Yeah.
like when you sit and you watch this film, you can see the goodness in every single one of them. You see why they
Mhm.
love each other, why they care for each other, and what makes them good people. They're complicated people. They're
Yeah.
not bad people. The things,
Hmm.
but none of them is without blame. None of them is
Yeah.
innocent, if that's the word.
They're all, young 20s people who are doing things that once you look back on, you're like, maybe shouldn't have done that. Maybe, maybe I was an asshole, actually. Was I the villain in this situation? I don't know. But it's not like movie villain, like you
Yes.
said, it's just complicated. They're all doing things,
Yeah.
some things questionable, some things you're like, that's a great thing.
Yeah.
Like people do
Yeah.
in their everyday life.
Which very much appeals to my like my like theater person sensibilities of like there aren't goodies and baddies. There's just like people that are muddling through conflict and making choices and trying to affect one another. And it's it's one of, I would say it's a very theatery film in terms of like the dialogue is really important, but this you couldn't do this on stage. You just couldn't. Like
Yeah.
what they put together in this film. I could see something like this happening on stage, like in terms of how the layout of the relationships goes. Unless you're going to have a literal like tennis match on stage, there's just like something about that that really ties it all together throughout. Got a lot of theaterness to it, but it really takes advantage of the fact that it's film,
Yeah.
right?
And this film also does a great job of, I know, again, probably not as much for specifically straight men. I noticed that they're the ones who are like, this isn't sexy. Y'all have been saying it's so sexy, and it's where's the sexy? They're the outliers because for me, this film showcases how you can make a film so sexy and
Without
sensual
sex.
without sex. I
Yeah,
think
there
we
is
get
not a
close
sex
one
scene.
time. We get
Yeah.
close one time, but there's no sex scene here.
And Larry, I was thinking about this a lot, me moving into our discussion about how sex kind of disappeared. And I think it's kind of unfortunate because a lot of what was really it's the loss of sex in film, especially good sex scenes, has actually been detrimental for women, I think, because we need a little bit more mental stimulation and we need that sexy there and we need to kind of like have the charging of it. And
Yeah.
so, men, no offense, men are pretty much ready to go like 80% of the time. But women need a little bit more. And when we get rid of the parts of film, with in the interest of like, oh, we don't want to objectify women, we actually kind of shut women out of like watching films and being aroused and like getting involved in that like way and having that kind of move and breed into their lives, which I have now a theory as to why the romance novel industry is like booming. Like I think because we spent about a decade without these nice kind of like little sexual outlets, little
Yeah.
like boom 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 moments for women and just like going to see films and in our media in general, that they're really turning to romance novels to get that fix for
Yeah.
their larger lives. Yeah, I do agree that this film absolutely had like sexy without there literally being sex scenes. They did such an incredible job of like the part that's sexy for women is the lead up. It's not the actual wham bam, thank you, ma'am. It's the tension, right? That's why women read a whole romance novel that only has like maybe two or three sex scenes or not even that much. They want the like titillation, they want the banter, they want the craving and the denying and the like, right? That's what it is, and that's what this film really does well. And yes, I enjoyed that. I thought that makeout scene between Patrick and Art was sexy.
But
I
so
mean,
much of it is like just framing. Like it's the way that he frames, well, Luca is a gay man. So the way that he frames both Art and Patrick on the tennis court is extremely sexy. Like they're just he'll have them take off their shirt, which again is something that tennis players do just like in real life. So it's like not just this gratuitous man just throwing off his shirt, but it's the way that he either looks up at them or looks down. It's just the angle of the camera where he decides to set. Even
they're also always
Zendaya
like
gets like
glistening with
always
sweat, which is
glistening.
like,
There's this scene, oh my God, it was in the trailer where they literally have Mike looking down at the camera. So you're like underneath him
yeah,
with this like water drip.
yeah,
And it's like, whoa. We have Tashi and Patrick in this bedroom where they have their fight. Even
yeah,
the way he frames that. Zendaya is a very small girl. She's dainty. Suddenly she had an ass in this scene. Like
yeah.
booty was on display. You know what I
We're gonna
mean?
go with the costuming as well. I think they didn't. Every one of Zendaya's panties was like on point. I was
Like,
like, I
whoa.
would never wear those because they look deeply uncomfortable to me. But damn, does her ass look good in those?
Yeah, even like, yeah, right off the bat, she's like lotioning up or something, and then we cut to art in bed, and he's wearing like these little tiny briefs, and it's just like halfway out of
Yeah.
the blanket.
There's sexy people. Be allowed to be
Just
sexy.
be sexy. And that's so
Yes.
much about what's going on here. That's just so good. Mixed with, of course, all the high drama.
The makeout scene in the Applebee's parking lot, like there's the, like when you describe that, it doesn't sound sexy. But this scene was sexy. It was like cute and kind of romantic and sweet. And then what they're like making out like was great. I never thought about this before on this movie and kind of did a little research on this. The invention of the intimacy director. No, I changed my mind about it. Initially, I was like, oh, maybe it's just like a little bit too much taking the director's ability to
Mm,
kind of direct and connect with his actors and make decisions and da da da. But now I kind of think about it in the terms of like it's just another choreographer, another
yeah.
fight person, and it's another like creative mind. And it's not just about how do we make sure that all of the actors are comfortable, because that's important. But I
Yeah.
also think it's about like how do we also choreograph this so it still looks
Yeah.
sexy from this angle and that angle, and how do we sell this in the right way? Like it
Yeah.
actually, like I think if you take it from a not just we're protecting everybody, which is great and important, but like it also is enhancing the sexiness. I'm all for intimacy coordinators. Like, yeah, you just want to find the intimacy coordinators that understand both sides of that coin. Of it's not just let's make sure that everybody's fully comfortable and
Yeah.
that there's no shenanigans going on, which obviously is super important, but you also have somebody that's enhancing everything by being there and knowing and in their area of expertise what looks fucking sexy.
And I definitely
That's
think there's something about it of even with the whole comfortable thing. I think there is always something about when you feel more comfortable, you're willing to go, you know what I mean? You're kind of willing to
yeah,
go there into
yeah,
places. Like if you have this skeezy guy director like off to the side, you're not
yeah.
gonna feel like comfortable in your skin. Whereas if you have this intimacy coordinator, it helps you get into like that space to go there and give us that sexy scene we need. So I definitely agree. On one of the films that I was specifically going to talk about in the next section with like red, white, and royal blue, there was actually a moment, I think it was when they're out just kind of like sunbathing, that they were like, actually, we don't really need the intimacy coordinator for this moment.
And it may also be like that because they facilitated the comfort between these two
Yes.
people that they were ready. They didn't need it. And that's what your director, as a director, you want as well,
Yes.
right? Like you
Yeah.
want to have facilitated how these two actors interact with each other and how these characters should work with each other to the point where you don't have to make every single decision for them. You want to let actors act. But
And I
anyways, back to challengers.
Now, I think we have to talk about, we can't go through this whole review without talking about score here.
Oh yes, the
It's
score.
such an
That
amazing
was another
score.
one of the first things I said. I was like, man, that score was damn good. And then Trenton Reznor's name came up, and I was
Yeah,
like,
Addis
oh,
Cross and Resner. Sorry. Yeah.
that makes
No,
a lot of sense.
so good. Some people have had their issues with this score as well. I don't know. Maybe they don't like that techno-y sound because it's not a traditional musical score. Like it's not a, when
There,
you think of a movie score, it doesn't have the sounds of that. But oh my God,
I
I
think, yeah,
love
I mean,
it.
I think I think it's sometimes, and this is really like a mixing thing. I
Yes,
think it's
it's the
sometimes that
mixing.
the score was like
Mhm.
too loud
Yeah,
for what was going on, but I
right.
understood the repetitive theme, right? Like he had this really like tense sort of like, I like it. The best way I would say to describe ever heard the Nine Inch Nails song Closer, it has a lot of those vibes to it where it's just like bass and like speedy bass and it's sexy. It's like sexy instrumentals, which is a weird point to figure out in music. You can do it. It's Trent Reznor, I think.
And I love that it is an indicator of when we're really playing tennis. So it always comes in
Yes.
on the tennis matches,
Yes.
but then every now and then it will kick in when they're just doing something else. But it's like another indicator of the match is on, kind of like. So whenever you start really ramping that up, even in their everyday lives, it's a
Hmm.
real indicator of like, oh, we up to some mess. Like, uh-oh. It gets
Hmm.
messy and then it'll die out when
Yeah.
we're just doing whatever. But oh, I loved the score, and it kind of takes on, I don't know, it just added so much to the atmosphere,
Yeah.
particularly in that last scene. It just is like that score helps elevate everything in that final scene.
Yeah, yes. Yeah,
But
I think it
oh,
helped elevate a lot of the scenes, and I think
yeah.
it helps the viewers to follow each moment, right? Where
Yeah.
like you said, like it's when they're really playing tennis, right? This is the metaphor in the film is that like really playing tennis basically in this
Yeah.
film means that you're genuinely engaged in a real moment with the person that you're with. And this is like I like want to I want everybody that I ever work with to watch this movie so that I can use this metaphor and be like every time I'm doing a scene I'm like I want to see some real tennis. Like that's what you want in a scene as a director is like real tennis. And I loved how the music helped you to understand those moments where all happening and where you could like really feel the stakes and everything building
Yeah.
up.
But speaking of that real tennis, I just have to say I love the little callback moments throughout the entire film. So early on, we get this whole speech about tennis and love, like this love song that's being done, like you're creating magic. And then that comes back in the final scene in a way we don't expect. There's this tell about a tennis ball and the racket and the placement before a serve that comes back in a dramatic way. That final scene as well. And then even small moments that I think further really elevate the relationships, like both Tashi and Patrick like have Art spit his gum out into their hand at
So
different
cute.
points in the movie. Again, showing their like affection toward him, like really kind of deepening
It's
this love
intimate, right?
triangle.
Like there's there's like exactly one person in the world who could spit their gum into my hand and it's my daughter.
Yeah,
My
you're like,
like
oh, okay.
who's
And he has
you
these
know,
two
well she doesn't
people
spit
who
gum. There's a lot of
love him.
crayons, whatever toy is in her mouth, her hair tie.
Or like yeah, they have like smaller, more subtle moments that really kind of showcase the male on male love, like this really
Yeah.
physical affection they show toward each other several times throughout the movie. This churro scene that oddly
Oh,
gets
the
like
churros. I know they're
sexy.
so the way he like and I don't any other director would not have made that scene nearly as sexual as it was. But he like placed them. Yeah, I read like an article from the screenwriter and he said it was always churros. That he's like, I don't know if Stanford has churros in the dining hall, but it's California, so probably. But in every iteration, it was always churros. But like he was like, but it was Luca who really turned that scene with the way he blocked it into what it was. And it's great too because there's a moment where you see these just little things. He pulls the stool
Mhm.
with his foot a little closer to him. It's just I want to be close to you, and he pulls his like that's
Yeah.
where we need to be physically to like chit chat with each other.
It's just all
For
these little touches throughout. Now, I will say one of my negatives is I'm always gonna be this person, especially near the end. I think I love the ambiguous ending, so I'm not one to like need to wrap
I'm for
everything
an
up.
ambiguous ending. I
I'm
think
all
it's
for it.
fine.
But I think we could have even gone just a little bit more explicitly gay and poly at some venture. I think we
I
could have
was thinking
pushed it
that
there.
I think you could do this movie, but it would be a different film where, like, from the very beginning, we're exploring
Yeah.
this affection in a throuple situation. I think it's a much better structure in terms of like it creates a lot more content, which is more interesting to watch, and it's also I think a lot more accessible for
Yeah.
a largely monogamous audience. Although to be fair, polyamory has been getting more and more popular, right? There was this
True.
whole big like New York Times article, and there was
Yeah.
like this lady who put up her polyamory memoir. They got another New York Times write about it, so it's like it's in right now.
It's in
But
vogue.
I think generally this was a great kind of primer for it. And I do know also like the concept of an open relationship is a lot more common in the gay community. So I imagine that Luca, he's also an artist. I'm sure he's got a pretty, like, I'm not going to say a real life experience with it because I don't know, but I think there's a good chance that he has a good sort of background in this stuff. And I think like I said, watching it, he seems to understand that concept of like how a triad works
Yeah.
and like what needs to be there. And, he really, he seems to not have a lack of understanding of these basic polyamorous concepts that, poly people have been talking about for at least a decade.
I was gonna say, Ren, I feel like you should really appreciate Luca is one of those who clearly has like a really good visual eye. He's a great
He
director, like
does.
everything he directs, but he doesn't feel the need to sit and write. Like he doesn't write his films.
And he has a lot of respect for the writer. So I was just talking about this. In theater, the playwright has like absolute dominion over the words that are being said. So you can't change anything in a play without the permission of the playwright. Like you are licensing the play from that person. In the film industry, they basically buy the script from you. And once it's gone, it's fucking gone. Like, so that's why you see these films that have like six different writers on them. It's because one person wrote it and then like over time like six other people like added things, changed things, shifted it around, got writing credit. And sometimes that can be to the detriment of film, sometimes it's good, but in this case the writer of the film, they brought him in and he was there to rewrite things as they needed to be rewritten. And I think that is again to the advantage of this film, that you had this person that understood what he was trying to say with all of his dialogue or these actions. And one interaction that he in one of the interviews that somebody was talking about is that he had written a bunch of stuff about how these two guys would have hit on her when they were like 17, and when Zendaya read it, she was like, this is garbage. I would walk away immediately if these dudes said this shit to me. So you're gonna need to fix it. And so he's like over there trying to write it, and he was like, she's very kind, but she kind of snarkily was like, come on, smart guy, come up with some smart things. And he was like, you need to get the fuck away from me right now. Which I think is an adorable, really
Yeah.
fun, sweet story, but it all just shows the kind of respect for the writer that they had. Like it wasn't like let's all sit here and come up with a bunch of ideas. It was like, nah, this guy, this is his job, this is his work, this is what he's
Yeah.
gonna do. And Luca Guadagnino is like, yeah, I will make this perfect. I will make it beautiful. It will be gorgeous. But I will need you to write the words for me. You will craft the story. And we will tell this together. This is my
Yeah.
job. That is yours.
I think, well, I just think, and I think maybe that's part of the reason is people get like attached to these ideas, so then they want to direct it themselves. And we see a lot of people who aren't necessarily built for both. Like they're
Mhm.
really good at one or the other, and but they
Yes.
want to do both of them.
Patty,
We're getting
stop
a lot of
writing.
those, and I feel like I think it's, sometimes it's good. Sometimes some people are very good at being writer directors in film, and they can do well.
I
A lot of
only
times, though, you're like, oh, let somebody
Honestly, it
else
feels
write
like the
it.
only times it well is when it's a small scale thing,
Yes,
when it's just
usually.
like a single writer director and it's like they're kind of self-funding it. Yeah, we can get into a whole talk about the writer
Woo!
director thing, but again, if you're writing and directing, then you don't have a bunch of people in
A
the
check.
middle there to like help you edit.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is when it's low budget, you have to edit yourself because you are required to get things done
Yeah.
in like a monetary budget. And so that's where the cuts come from. Whereas like once you are free to do whatever your crazy person mind has decided to do and you don't have anybody around to tell you that's a bad idea, you end up with the prequels to Star Wars is what you
Woo!
end up.
Yeah, it's just,
Anyways, Luca Guadagnino, we appreciate that you
appreciate it.
seem to have great respect for the screenwriters of your
Yes.
films.
You're down with letting people do their job. Obviously, you let your cinematographers do their job with he just lets people do their job. He's like,
That's
I'm the director. I'm gonna help you all do the job to the best of your ability.
that's what a good director does. They find the people that are good at their jobs and they let them do their jobs.
I
They,
think that's it.
guide it so it all fits together. That's your
Yeah,
job
he
as the
creates a
director. You're just supposed to
film.
make sure it doesn't look fucking crazy at the end of the day. And like 1,000 different people made it, you have
Yeah.
to make it look like, one cohesive unit of people made it. But yeah,
He also takes some wild risks in this film. Like at one point where the tennis ball, we take the viewpoint of the tennis
yeah.
ball. Another one, we are underneath the tennis court looking up. And apparently, initially he wanted to do that with Suspiria. So he wanted to be under the dance floor when they're doing stuff. It's just the budget wouldn't allow him to create the set he wanted to can do that. So he said, "Okay, I'm gonna bookmark that." And now he's like, "Oh, a tennis court. That is
Gonna be his
duh."
like signature move now. Every time you go to see a Luca Guadagnino movie, you're gonna be looking for that underneath shot.
Right? It's just like this crazy thing.
He made some wild swings there, and but he didn't overdo
No,
it, right? It
stay.
was like, this is weird. If this went on much longer, I would be like, this is stupid. But it was like weird, weird, weird. Okay. And that it wasn't just that one thing, right? Like
Yeah.
once he had kind of like, you're the tennis ball, and he did that a few different times. It was like, okay, this is just like a choice. I'm okay with it. I can dig it.
Yeah.
Like, it helps us feel like we're in the middle of like their real tennis match.
I love challengers. That's definitely obviously near the top of my list right now for 2024. I love to see a filmmaker get to still make his kind of weird, still pretty daring
Yeah.
mainstream movie with a little bit bigger of a budget so he can
Mhm.
accomplish all these things he wants to do while still like making something that's cohesive and coherent. Because again, a lot of indie directors, they get that budget for the first time, and I don't know what goes on. It's like, whoa! But Luca like was able to blend his weirdness and like his daring nature with a more accessible story and create something that I think was pretty fantastic
Yeah.
overall.
This film pretty solidly sits as a piece of art. That's one of the things that I do appreciate about him is he clearly treats making film as like creating a piece of art, whereas I know a lot of other film is creating a piece of entertainment. And that's good,
Has
that's
its
valid.
place.
I need entertainment in my life. I'm
Yeah.
here for it. But I also really love a good piece of film art. I'm a film person. Like
Yeah.
I'm a
We
nerd. I'm
love
gonna
to
enjoy
see
it.
it.
Like you said, I think it's the most accessible because I think he does. While it is a film that is art, it is also a sexy film about sports. People love sports. Not me, but people, the
It
general
had a little
people.
more, I have to say, especially from the trailers. I knew tennis was like the framework. It definitely had more tennis in it than I was anticipating. When
Yeah,
I walked in there, I was like, oh,
like I
no,
said,
it's a
I would have liked
tennis
it
movie. I'll
10%
say
more
it.
if I knew anything about how tennis worked.
Thankfully, I know about tennis. So I was on board. I was like, let's go. Hit it.
Was it accurate? Was it well
It was,
researched?
yes, they didn't throw in anything too wild or like out of the blue. I knew the rules at least, thank God. But yeah, it was pretty accurate. As I said, even their like movements, like the crossing chairs, everything was right on.
Excellent. Quick aside, we also need to give a shout out to the actor who played the judge. Is that what they're called?
The umpire,
The umpire.
the chair umpire,
The referee? No, umpire. Okay, great. We're just
umpire.
picking random turns for the people in charge. Got it. The chair
Yes.
umpire
He was
was this.
fabulous and wonderful, but he was also in one of the Spider-Man movies I learned afterward, where
Oh,
he's like hosting, he's like wearing a Mary Jane shirt in the second of the thing, and he's like, "Ah, that's
he
Jane."
was a delight. He's really the only other character in the movie. I guess the mom and the
Yeah,
daughter, but realistically, he's the only other like character that anybody really interacts with other
yeah.
than these three. And he's just delightful. You need to be doing the sport thing. I don't know any of the terms, but
I have to admit, I loved, so being someone who does know, tennis, some of us, it's still a very gentile sport in its out in its rules. So I loved Ren being
since
like scandalized that there is a racket abuse, a warning that takes place.
I had a
Um,
laugh.
Started laughing when he was like, racket abuse. Yes, if you smash your racket,
Not
you
that I
get
don't think that
penalized.
like it makes sense, right? Like in hockey, there's penalties for just
Yeah.
being an asshole. There's generally penalties in almost every sport for just being an asshole, but the racket abuse thing's
Yeah.
pretty
If you
funny.
say a curse word and it's audible,
The curse thing is
yeah,
funny. That is also
they
it's
get
so
you.
genteel. It's so
Yeah.
waspy. like to its core.
Serena and John McEnroe, they said, I'm gonna push these limits. I'm gonna push what I can do on this court to the max.
And I'm still gonna
And
win.
I'm still gonna win. But yay, challengers. I'm excited. It makes me excited for more Luca always. And I
Yeah.
love seeing, Zendaya have her year at the cinema so far with probably two of my favorite movies of the year. And I think I love seeing her get to do two very different things because I feel like this was a very different role than,
Yeah.
little Chani in Dune Part 2.
Yes. Lots of Lady Macbeth vibes, but like not evil
Yeah.
villain Lady Macbeth.
Now, like we said, this is just kind of like the latest in this new wave that's really only taken place over the last 2 years, maybe, where last year was really where we noticed it. We had, Red, White, and Royal Blue that I mentioned. We had Anyone But You that came out. We had Poor Things that came out. All
And
in a
Oppenheimer even
year.
had like
Oppenheimer made
some
people
sex
like
scenes.
scandalized. Oppenheimer's the one I think that's most criticized, surprisingly enough. Well, Poor Things got quite criticized at a point, but Oppenheimer has the least
That's because
amount.
people didn't understand. Well,
Well, we'll talk about it. So
people were like,
Oppenheimer,
it was like watching a toddler have sex. I was like, she's not a toddler though. I
ah,
understand it's like a
oh,
young
we didn't get to
brain,
talk about Poor
that's
Things.
a full-grown woman's body, right? Like,
Yeah, so I think Oppenheimer got the most criticism and it has the least sex and nudity in it.
yes.
And I think maybe that's what contributed to it is because it's this pretty serious drama about, the
Huh.
man Oppenheimer that just has these random, kind of not random, because I mean,
I
the
don't think
first
they're
one,
random. Yeah.
I think people are like, "Oh, look, why do we have to have him naked and having sex in
First of all,
the
because we
interrogation
like
room?"
it. That's my first answer.
And so does
Because
Florence
people like
Pugh.
sex. Because
Florence
it does
loves
it
getting
for
the girls out. Okay, she has shown that on her own
She's
life
happy. She's proud of herself. Yeah, that is the first. That's Christopher Nolan's first sex scene in his
ever,
illustrious
ever,
career.
which is not
And
surprising because
my argument for it is, obviously, like we like sex. All right, we're human, we're adults, we like it. But I think the other bigger thing I think for me was that I thought it was. I feel it's been really easy to asexualize Oppenheimer. He's a genius. He's kind of hard to connect to. And so, like, showing him in these extremely intimate details really makes him a fully fleshed out character. Not to mention that, like, I think the affair is important. I think that she alone is a really important. Without her, none of the rest of the conflict of the movie would have happened, right? Like she's kind of the reason he got sucked in even deeper into, and she's the big thing they point to when they're trying to call him a communist,
yeah,
basically. So
sneaking
much.
around. So there's like all these like, what was
Yeah,
he
it
doing
makes him this
behind closed
complicated
doors? Yeah.
character. Yeah, it adds to the complication of it, right? Like that was what Oppenheimer was focused on, is that this man is very complicated. His emotions on what he did and what he created are very complicated, and the question of the good and the bad is very complicated. So I think having that to flesh him out fully, so it's not just about this one thing. Like if you're gonna do a biopic about a person and do their whole life, then do their whole life. The
Maybe it's
minor
like
character
awkward,
level of
weird. I
every
don't
single
know.
woman in that movie, and
Well,
that's
yes.
its own sort of
I mean, that's Christopher Nolan's thing still. He still struggles to write. He's a writer director. So he still struggles to write women, which is very clear amongst almost all of his filmography. He has a woman in there every time.
And
How
you know
effective or
what?
what they do, I don't know. But
I think that's probably fine and okay. My argument is then great. We just need more women directors who can write women.
And the other
That's
thing is,
fine. We just also
maybe
then
he's not great at it because the other thing Christopher Nolan is himself, much like maybe Oppenheimer would have been, himself is often accused of being an emotionless director. Like
mm,
he's technically wonderful. Like there's no denying. I mean,
yeah.
Christopher Nolan is a master at the technicals of filmmaking, but he struggles with more emotional content and relating people to his
Hmm.
characters. And I think maybe that was, I don't know, like you said, this is the first time he's ever had a sex scene, and he's been making films for over 20 years. But yeah, it just is what it is. So
It's not his
that's
thing.
the one.
Oh,
Obviously,
Anyone But You was another one.
Anyone But You.
So you have movies where it's like sexy, as in challengers and
Mhm.
like poor things, even. I don't know. There's like raunchy
Well,
sexy, and then there's like sexy sexy. And
now I do
I
have to
think there's a
admit,
few
Ren,
different, but both of those things seem to be coming back.
you liked Poor Things more than I did. I generally like it, but I do think, particularly her in that damn brothel, takes up a little bit too much time. I'm like, all right,
Sure.
there's a point in that movie where I get to like, all right, we get it. Like, I don't
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
we
yeah.
get it. Why do we have this man bringing in his two little children to watch for a tutorial? This is a little bit odd to me, but okay, moving on, girl. This is too much. I have to admit, of all the movies we list down, the ones directed by straight men seem to be my least favorite when it comes to this, because I like Oppenheimer more than Poor Things and Anyone But You, like as a film. I don't love it, I don't hate it. It's there for me in Oppenheimer. It doesn't detract my viewing experience, but I don't know how much it enhanced it. It just kind of was there. Poor
Mhm.
Things, it started great,
Pretty
and then
central.
I was like, what is going on with this Poor Thing? Like, this is a little bit too much. I don't know. Emma Stone girl. Okay. But I also found that premise of that baby brain in the woman's body to be strange all around. I was just like, okay, Yorgos, now you're taking the piss. I don't understand, but sure, sure, we got the
Which is
fetus's
funny
brain
because
in the
I hated the killing of a sacred deer because I was like, I like weird theater and I like weird choices for the sake of like, let's be a little strange, but fuck that. That was too weird just for the sake of being weird. Whereas this one, I just got all like it felt very like theater of the absurd. It felt
But I
very
also
like
felt
kind
like
of
I don't know. See, that's the one thing is Yorgos' film, this one, Poor Things, to me, I understood what we were doing with her development, but I felt like almost all of her character development came through sex. So I felt like it came from a very male
sure.
perspective. Like I feel like that's how he grew up, is all of his character development maybe was like viewed through a sexual lens in his life. And it's a male kind of way of looking at
Sure.
developing as a human because I don't
Yeah.
think we got enough development from her, like just living life. Like we would get little moments, but there wasn't enough. It all felt like it was funneled. And also,
I kind
we
of
did not get
disagree.
nearly enough male nudity to offset. See, that's one of the cases. It was a male straight guy director that had Emma Stone naked that whole movie. We got like we
Challengers
didn't
had
we didn't get
nose and
any
Dea boobs, but we
attractive
did get
men
some.
naked in Poor Things. We got a few ugly old nasty men getting naked in that one. I was like, what the
To bring it back to challengers, no Zendaya boobies, plenty
That's
of
true.
Zendaya underbutt, but we
Underbutt.
did get full frontal, but it was like not in like a
Yeah.
sexy way,
It was
which I
just
thought
like
was an interesting choice.
there was one say the sauna scene is where like the kind of more sexy again though building up this like sexual tension between our two male
Yeah,
main
but you don't
cells. Not
actually
full
see
frontal.
the.
It's just a nice little booty shot.
I mean, here's the
Sure.
thing. I don't know. I mean, I'm sexually attracted to both men and women. I don't find a flaccid penis sexy. So I
Like
think boobs are sexy. I don't like. So generally, it's really hard for me to be like, yeah, more full frontal on men. Like, just we can get into this whole thing. I disagree with you, and I think that not having men in there was important because it really was about her and her sexual journey, and that was the whole point. Is that like men kept trying to center her in their lives, and she kept on being like, "No, that doesn't,
yeah,
it just
well,
makes no sense for me." So that was the thing I really liked about Poor Things is that it and like I think that that's also in terms of like the period where where it's being told I understand why like there's the reality of like if she's going to be an independent woman in that time period, she can go into a brothel and she can do that. I think it's also part of like just exploring this
yeah,
idea of like what we ascribe socially to sex and what wouldn't already be inherently in your brain if you
yeah,
hadn't grown up in our society that basically is kind of prudish about it and has restrictions about how you're supposed to feel about it and like how it should work and telling a woman like that your body is sacred and you should protect your sex and that like you shouldn't have sex with anyone
yeah,
and then her kind of being like, well, but I can use this for and she kind of builds her own business on it. And I think that is really important in terms of like the historical
yeah,
role of prostitution because the reality is that there were women who that was your option pretty much for becoming an independent woman prior to a very recent history was you could go could make enough money as a prostitute and then you could start a business, but
Yeah.
you couldn't just like expect to go out into the world with no money. That was how you earned money. So
Yeah.
I'm fully okay with it from a like a reality perspective. I think, I could go on about the prostitutes of the West who built up the entire West's economy because they fucked a lot of really lonely dudes and then basically were like, great, you know what would really help out here? A school. You know what would be really great? Some stores. Because the men can't be trusted to like build up an actual society. They need
Yeah.
women to go like, you know what we really need? Sheets on the bed. So, anyways, back to this topic of
Yeah.
the sex in films. I want to just like backtrack a little bit because it's come back, but where did
Yes.
it go? It's a great question. I've thought about this prior to this resurgence of it, and just kind of like thinking about it in my own life and my own experience. And I just really don't feel like I am as maybe TMI. I'm as horny as I used to be. And then it may just be that I'm getting a little bit older, but it also feels like I don't see sex around me like in the media that I consume in the same way that I did when I was in my 20s. That like, there was so much going on when I was a teenager. There was tons of sexy going on. Like the erotic thriller was having a time in the 90s.
Yeah.
And in the early 2000s, there was even that movie, Unfaithful, which was like, a sexual awakening for lots of us. I'm like, oh, ugh.
And you know what? They did so well. And we talked about it, even with Challengers does so well, is at least in the early 2000s, because I think the 2000 to 2010 area is where the backlash came from, big time. So that 2010 through like 2023, we got nothing. But the 2000s, the early 2000s, once again, even if they weren't overtly sexual, they let sexy people be sexy. Like you think of Troy, that is all that movie
Yeah.
is sexy people being on screen. You think of, we all talk about bisexual awakenings. That's what The Mummy is two
Yeah,
sexy
the
ass
mommy.
people running around.
And there was definitely
Oh my God, Georgia the Jungle. Woo!
there's
My
also
God,
a
Brendan
difference
Fraser.
too, right? Like I think we threw out the baby with the bathwater when we got rid of sex because like if you look at like sexual thrillers, those are less inclined to just like treat women like objects, whereas like
Mhm.
there was tons of stuff in the 80s and the 90s that were just like raunchy objectification of
Yes.
women. Like I love Animal House. I think it's fun. It's also like fucked up. There's just like terrible things.
Yeah,
Revenge
no,
of the
Animal
Nerds,
House. Woo.
super fun. Also, like, really fucked up in its depiction of women and like sex and culture in general. So, like, there's just a lot of stuff that you
Yeah.
can point to. Fast Times at Ridgemont High that one's kind of a little more complicated, but
And that brand of raunchy comedy, once again, it went away in the 90s for the most part. Like there was stupid
yeah.
comedies really emerged in the
Ooh,
90s,
American
Dumb and
Pie,
Dumber, and
that's like
but
fucked
the
up.
like
You like look at
2000s
it.
spawned American Pie, and all of its freaking sequels were like late
Yeah.
90 into the 2000s, Shallow Hal type of shit. Like it was a
Yes.
bunch of like Euro Trip, which I love, but Freddy
Yes.
Got
Like,
Fingered. It was all of this kind of like madness that was like raunchy for the sake of raunchiness. We had
yes.
horror movies. This was like the pit of horror, was
Yeah.
just naked women
Yeah.
being objectified for no clear reason in these horror movies.
Yeah.
And that was another peak in the 2000s. And
Yeah.
so I think people got puritanical against
Yeah.
that. They saw that raunchiness. They saw women just being naked for no reason. Like she was just,
Yeah.
sitting and watching TV without a top on for no clear reason. You were like, what the fuck? Okay.
There's
Sure. Uh
also just like the clear trope that was established, like women, girls who dared to lose their virginity being
yes.
punished with death, right? Like that's in and of itself super problematic as a trope that kept getting kind of perpetuated. So I
Yes.
think there was a lot of like fuckery that was going on. And so I think like I understand culturally why we started to push against that, but also like we got to the movie industry is a money industry. And I think another thing that happened is that they really started to chase that PG-13 rating,
Yes.
because they knew that 13-year-olds were really going to see films. They were like, they don't have money to go out and drink. So they were going to the movies with their
Yeah.
friends. And so I think that was part of it, was trying to like get that rating. And so that's why movies fairly violent, but the sex and the like
Yeah.
swearing kind of died out. Also, with those PG-13 ratings, if you remove all the sex and you make them a little more palatable, then you can also sell it over to China and overseas and places where
That's the
they
other
have a
part.
lot more stringent, like, sort of
Yes.
take on what's allowed.
Yeah, we talk about
Uh,
the US puritanical
Economic.
compared to
Yeah.
Europe, but Europe is not the big money market overall
No.
for movies. It's
Mm.
Asia and the
No, if
Asian
you look at, I
markets.
mean, if you look at French films, sex never left.
Never.
Like,
They stayed on that beach
and
constant.
another aside addendum I would say about this is that you and me and Nicole, we all go to see the lesbian movies whenever they come out. But in general, I actually think we got a lot more homosexual films, gay films in general in that gap.
Yeah.
And those films really didn't shy away from sex and sexiness, right? Like
And I
you've
think
got
maybe because they knew
Who's
they
the
were like,
Warmest
we ain't getting
Color?
released in China anyway. They're not letting the
Yeah,
gay film get
exactly.
over here. So,
Exactly. So they were like, yeah, we don't have to chase that. Let's tell
yeah.
a real story and let's move into this. I think that's kind of an interesting thing that happened is that we lost sex with straight people, but we gained a lot of sexual
Yeah.
representation, like literal sexual representation for gay people in the last, like in that gap, that interim. So great for those of us that are down for some girl on girl, guy on guy action. But for anyone who was
Yeah.
looking for and, aroused and wanting something a little like spicy in their films, it's really died down generally. And just, we can also just point generally, films have really moved away from plot lines that would incorporate sex into them, right? Like you just don't have as many romantic comedies coming out. You
Yeah.
don't have as many thrillers coming out. Like it's leaned really deep into blockbusters almost always or
Yeah. The
family
superhero
films
genre
where
taking
yeah,
over.
you're going to bring your whole family, so they're going to make a bunch of money off of Minions 12, It's an economic thing, but I'm really glad to see that the pendulum seems to be shifting. Although, as you did point out, Gen Z is like, we want less sex, we want more, we want more friendships and non-romantic relationships, and here's here's my snarky response was tough noogies, the millennials want sex and we have more money and there's more of us. But my real response is we both, and we have had both. Like I really think it really has been a tremendous amount more diversity in the types of
Yeah.
relationships and representations that you
Which is
see in
great.
films. And it's great, but we shouldn't do away with
Yes.
sex. Sex is a huge part of the human experience. It's this greatly connecting part of it. And I think little Gen Zers, I know you guys don't like to have sex, but you would if you tried. But like that's part of the thing is like maybe if they did have a little bit more eroticism in some of the media that they consumed, if they saw more representations of people in happy, functional, healthy, exciting, sexy couplings, that would make them more interested in getting off of their phones and getting out of their virtual safety bubble and actually having to put themselves out there. And I know it's very scary, especially in this time and age, but you guys will be so much happier if you learn how to connect with each other on not just a friendship level. I Friends are so important and you should absolutely have friends, but you need sex. Not every single one of you, but in general, it's impossible that like all of a sudden this one generation after like thousands of years of evolution, sex has driven our species. All of a sudden they're like, we don't like it. We don't want it. It makes us squicky. Guys.
Yeah, I
um
mean, it is definitely we're at that point. I don't know. We're definitely there, at least right now, where it's a little bit back. We've hit, like we said, this last year, particularly, especially what we mentioned. We have the new The Idea of You, which is an R-rated romantic comedy on Prime right now. We had Anyone
mhm,
But You. We talked about Red, White, and Royal Blue. So we're getting these R-rated comedies that are
mhm,
trying to like steam it up more in like a
mhm.
rom-com fashion, so it's not all just the Jennifer Lopez running around or wedding. that we've seen a million
It's like,
times.
yeah, I'm
Um,
really happy to move away from the era of romantic comedies that are 2 hours long and actually not a comedy. Like,
I think Ren liked Anyone But You a little bit more than me.
I
Because she just
did.
watched it. Look, I liked the scene where Glenn Powell thought he had a spider in his shorts and acted very dramatically about it all. That was my favorite scene of the whole movie. Sydney Sweeney, you've redeemed yourself in my eyes recently, but I thought Glenn Powell was acting against a very pretty wooden board for a
Yeah,
good majority of that film.
okay.
Um,
Two things I want to say about it. First of all, I laughed when I watched it. And that's one of the key things that I'm looking
yes.
for when I watch a romantic comedy is I want to laugh at some point. Also has a little extra special spot for me because it is a loose retelling of Much Ado About Nothing.
Yes.
Like literally the characters are Ben and B. And I didn't know that until they said, "Hi, I'm
Oh,
B, I'm Ben." I was like, "It's Much Ado!" I had to like look it up
yes.
after that.
And I think
But
it's
like
best when it
it
leans
clicked in
into
my
that.
head. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's best when it leans into that trope in the
yes,
movie. Also, I will say the unwritten shit was my also my favorite part. So other than the, Glenn Close spider bit,
his
the
Serenity
unwritten,
song.
I hollered. And I also loved the end credits where they
Yes.
all just the whole cast. I'm like, you know what? We need to bring back credit like
Yes.
random cast montages because they're fun. And this
I
was
like
really
bloopers.
fun.
I like cast montages. I like the credits,
Yeah.
little funsies in it, especially if it's so I
Yeah.
really liked that part of it. They made a joke multiple times about the age difference between Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell. And I would not have like thought about that at all if they like I had to look it up. I was like, they can't be that far in age. They're about 10 years apart, maybe a little bit less. He's like 30, she's like 26. So it's
Yeah.
not like
Crazy.
crazy.
Yeah.
And which is funny because right, I literally spent the top part of this being like, "Call me by your name is grooming," and in this one, I'm like, she's 26, and like, honestly, I would not have guessed that Sydney Sweeney was only 26. Because I come from the era of like, if a person is 26 in a film, they're 45 in real life, right?
Well,
Like,
yes, you know.
so I just, I don't think they needed to make that joke, but I do appreciate it because so often in old Hollywood, when you have an age gap, we pretend like that means
Well,
nothing, right? Like you've got like a 60-year-old man and a 30-year-old woman, and it's like, yeah, that's just normal. That's
yeah.
who they end up with, obviously.
Duh.
So I kind of appreciated that. I
Yeah.
also just really loved the recurring joke about the Glenn Powell character doing crack and meth and stuff while he was working on Wall Street or Goldman Sachs or something like that. I just thought was a fun. It was fun and it entertained me and
It
it
was
was
short.
sexy and I enjoyed it. And it was only an hour and a half,
And I will
hour
say
40.
their little scene, like that was one of my big complaints in that one, was their like little shower sex scene I thought was so weirdly staged and odd that I was like, this isn't very sexy. I don't know. Like they didn't stage it right. It's very okay,
Actually, honestly,
sure.
the parts that were a little more sexy were the parts where, like, at the beginning where they just
Yeah.
like each
That
other.
was the sexy part. Like when they tried to be sexy, I was kind of like, oh, I don't
Yeah,
know. This is kind of awkward.
yeah. I mean,
Next.
this is going back to what I said earlier. The simmer is what's sexy.
Yeah.
It's not the like actual sex, and they kind of really lean into. But you know what? Having had a long drought of no sex in any of my films, it's nice. It was a nice, refreshing
Well,
thing, and she's also feels very empowered throughout it. Right? It doesn't feel
yeah, she's a
like
fun character.
yeah.
It's just the performance. I was a little bit like, okay,
No,
go,
I
Sydney.
think Sydney Sweeney might be a terrible
Give
actress.
us nothing, Sydney. Give us nothing. I don't know. Okay, sure, girl.
Apparently,
Yeah,
she's really good in Euphoria. I thought she's like fine. I've only seen the first season.
she's very good. I thought she was very good in Immaculate. Actually, I think horror might be a better avenue for her. I think she's one of those actresses I think that struggles with the subtle a lot more, and that so like being an everyday person doesn't come natural to as weird as that sounds. So when she gets to be bigger in a horror movie like that, because even in Immaculate, I think in the first half I was like, uh-oh,
Mhm.
Sydney. But when she gets to unleash in the second half, she's a lot better. And
Yeah.
Euphoria, the best parts I've seen of her are when her character gets to be like, wow, like
Big.
dramatic and
Yeah.
crazy and manic. So I think she struggles with the subtle
Yeah.
acting.
My other big criticism of it, which is it falls in this is the problem with a lot of romance films, movies, stories, books in general, is that they don't ever actually explain to me why these people are loved. Like they just kind like right like they kind of montage through
Yeah.
all of the parts where they're like falling in love with each other, so that
Yes.
by the end when he's like, I love you, I love that you're so smart, and I love that, and I'm like, is she? I don't know. Does it seem like I've gotten
Yes.
much information to that effect at all? Like I just
Yeah.
don't know why these people love each other, like each other so much.
Yeah.
Like it's a fun, love the enemies to lovers dynamic. It's always a but you still have to like, you still got to sell me on like why these people like each other.
And I think
Um,
I think chemistry can overcome that a lot of times, and that's part of the
Chemistry
problem
can
in
overcome
anyone
it.
but
Yes.
you is they have to tell us it all because
Yes.
half of the chemistry is not giving what it needs to give quite
Yeah, they
enough. So
had
you're kind of
more.
like,
They had actually
oh,
had kind of cute like friend chemistry. Like I
yeah,
would buy
I
them
can
as
better as
besties.
friends, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't. I
But
didn't. Yeah, you're right. I can buy that for you. But I'm actually not that hard to please. If I laugh at a comedy, I
but
probably enjoyed it.
it's
The
better
jokes
than
are good.
most of the like, Netflix ones or the, like again, the Jennifer Lopez ones that have released recently that you're like, oh fuck, okay, Jesus. It's wretched. But yeah, fun. No, but you talked about this vacuum, and I think that's why uh, women were stuck with 50 Shades of Grey because it was the only
Yes.
thing, those were the 2010s, and suddenly it was like a hypersexual thing. So they were
Yes.
like, we need to just give you all sex, this movie, because there's no sex for women anywhere else. So women were like, oh, yes, a
Yeah.
romance with sex. That's nothing
Yeah.
but like
And I think
sex. So
that's
they,
part of
and they
why
were a
50
huge
Shades,
box
the
office
novel,
success.
yeah. That's why the novel, which was not good, was super popular. I mean, like the bar on romance novels, there's not a person who reads romance is going to tell you that they like expect quality writing from, like they know it's not good a lot of the
Yeah.
time, but that's not what they're reading it for. And like that's why E.L. James was writing absolute garbage, is not a good writer by any stretch of the imagination, and became a hugely successful
Huge.
best-selling author, partially because of just fucking luck and partially just because there was such a vacuum for women that needed something to get the juice going. you
Yeah.
know
Yeah, and that's what those movies did too. Like everybody always wondered that like it's not good, this and that, and that's why. I mean, it maybe if you sprinkled sex into other good movies and you
Yeah,
let people be sexy, the 50 Shades wouldn't have blown up like it
we
did.
wouldn't have had to watch weird ass 365 days that was very sexy but also very strange and confusing and problematic. So
You gotta
yes,
go like pseudo porn to is the next step, I guess. When you're puritanical, the only opposition is like pseudo pornography in the mainstream.
yeah. So Patrick and I don't know, maybe a few months ago, I think I've explained this before. We do you pick, one person picks five options and the other person picks one. And Thomas Crown Affair was on my list that I made for him because I knew he liked it and he'd seen it a while ago. And he remembered that he really loved the soundtrack. But then we watched it and I was like, damn, this movie is sexy. Why don't they make sexy movies anymore? Why do I have to watch this Rene Russo and Pierce Brosnan movie from 1998 to get like a sexy film? I listened to like the very beginning of some like super problematic YouTubers talking about why there was no sex in film, and they were like, "It's because if men don't have sex, then they're not masculine." I was like, "All right, I can't." That was about the time I turned it off and was like, "I can't play with
Well,
this
good for you. Yeah,
anymore."
turn that
But the
bullish
one
off.
thing that bothered me was there, like the big thing I picked up from it was this idea of like women have to be a boss babe, and that's why they can't have sex in films. And I'm like, that's not. I'm like, maybe that is part of the mentality for why the very male dominated filmmaking apparatus has avoided it, and they're like, no, that we don't want to objectify women, and they don't know how to make a boss babe who's also sexy. But like, I would point to the Thomas Crown Affair and say that's how you make a boss babe with agency that's fucking sexy.
I mean,
Like,
again, I don't know what is going on. The 90s got it right a lot. So I don't
yeah,
understand. Like a Fatal Attraction, that bitch
yes.
is crazy as fuck, but she is like
But
in
it's sexy when it's
control.
sexy.
She's
Yeah.
same thing. I mean, you were saying you don't remember if you even watched it. Basic Instinct obviously has one of the most like iconic full frontal female nudity scenes in all time, but Sharon Stone's character is a boss bitch in that movie. She is not some like being taken advantage. No, 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 no.
I really enjoy these films that I see where you've got women who are taking control of their sexuality in raunchy ways, right? Like there was one, and I don't think it got very much play, but I told even you had not seen it. There's a movie with Aubrey Plazas that I found on like fucking like Paramount Plus or something. So I was just like looking for stuff to see, but it was like and I've seen this trope with dudes before, and I've actually seen like a more recent film. But basically, the whole movie was that she had gone through all of high school without learning anything about sex. And so, like, the summer after high school, she makes a list of like every sexual thing she wants to try and just does it with whatever random dude that she can find to do the thing with. It wasn't an incredible piece of film by any means. There's a reason you probably haven't heard of it. It was still fun to see a woman in that position where, like, again, we spent the 80s and the 90s just giving a shit about men and their raunchy
Yeah,
behavior and
yeah.
their like I think it is important to see women as fully fledged human beings, right? Like I've said this on multiple times. Women should be able to be villains. Women should be able to be bad people. Women should also be able to be horny motherfuckers.
Do you think part of why Gen Z thinks there's so much like sex on things is because so much of it migrated into like pseudo sexy on TV? So like
I
once films stopped having sex scenes, we started getting like the Gossip Girls, the Pretty Little Liars, like those shows that had a lot of like relationship, sexy drama type things, but obviously, are still CW network television, so they don't do anything like that. But they just inundated like constant relationshipy nonsense all over the
That I mean
place.
that might be it that they did get and I feel like they got
A
maybe a
lot
lot
of
more of that
those.
like right like we got Buffy and Angel and like so our
And a warrior
relationships were like
princess.
yeah it wasn't as like
We got him actually again, late 90s TV, like our growing up TV, we had empowered ass women in television.
yeah
Alias was Jennifer Gardner and Alias was in the like that era. We got the reboot, but X-Men the animated series, the women were badass on that animated TV show. We had some badass women on TV. And then in the 2000s, it was nothing but just all the popular TV shows turned into like these teen sex dramas on like network
yeah
TV. So maybe
maybe
that's why
that
Gen
is
Z feels like they've been watching sex all their lives because they have, because they've
ah.
just been watching TV.
Yeah, I mean that I was actually thinking about that too. I do feel like during that period, even with adult film, you look at like Mad Men, that was another film. It was on regular cable, so they didn't
Yeah,
have as much like sex, but it was like sexy. There was like
yeah.
clearly sex scenes and things but like you had like True Blood that came out in
As I
that kind
say,
of
and then
dark period.
HBO
Yeah.
emerged. And so obviously the shows like Game of Thrones got a lot of backlash
But
because throughout the
also
early 2010s, they exploited women
yeah,
heavily on
but
that show.
also by the if you get like after the first couple seasons of Game of Thrones, a
They
lot of
stopped.
that nudity and sex really dropped
Really
off and was
dropped
kind
off.
of gone. And I think, yeah, that was part of this like backlash idea of
In True
we don't
Blood.
want any sex, stop objectifying women unnecessarily. And,
Yeah.
to be fair, I definitely think that there was a lot of like unnecessarily sexual. I
Well,
mean, like, we can go back to the books themselves. There's just some like weird,
I
unnecessary
mean, and then you get,
sexualization.
of course, those actors are like unknowns. So at a certain point, Amelia Clark literally went to them and is like, I'm not doing nudity unless it literally is in the plot. Like it makes sense for
Yes.
Daenerys. So she
Yeah.
didn't do it again until like season 6 because she was like, okay, y'all are doing this too much. Like I'm just naked for no reason. Like what are
Yeah.
we doing?
So I would give the Gen Z that perhaps they got a little too much sex in their TV. And I think that is part of the Darth sex shifted so much to
Yeah.
television that you just didn't need to see it in movies. You got like these other outlets for it.
Yeah.
Like apparently, I haven't watched a ton of it, but Outlander has like a bunch of like sex stuff in there. It's like
Well,
a lot of rape stuff in there. And I'm like,
that's why all the
yeah,
women love Sam Hugan. I know that Sam Hugan from that Outlander has like a fervent female fandom from
yes.
that Outlander show. Uh He's very
Um,
good looking, so I understand, but
And I think, and this also might just be like like literally a technology shift thing, right? Like you don't have to go to a movie theater to watch something sexy
yes.
anymore. You can just like sit at home and watch a sexy scene from a television streaming show, whatever. Like that's shifted away. So I'm glad that it's shifting back into film because I can't point to a ton of shows at the moment that lean into sex
If they
as
do,
the
they're
like,
more like because like sex education. Like you know what I mean? They're more like sex is
yes,
here
like
and we're talking about sex, but it's more enlightened. So it's not
correct.
just like some
Yeah, I also
bullshit.
think of Easy that was on Netflix. That was another one that was like it was like
Mm,
about sex, but it was really about like relationships
yeah.
and like the complications of them and modern love and
Well,
stuff
now
like
everybody
that.
hates Lena Dunham, so they look at girls and they're like, "Bitch, this is a mess." Now
Again,
they hate girls too because they hate Lena.
Girls came out in what, the 2010s? Was that when it
Yeah.
was out? Yeah, I mean, like, but Girls even didn't really have that much sex in it. I mean, it's certainly, I mean, it was like HBO, so it had a
Yeah,
certain
I had
amount of
to.
it,
Look,
but like,
HBO had a they were like, look, y'all have to have some sex in here. If you're gonna be on HBO, we're gonna get something out of
but
it. But
like, here's the other thing is like, I don't think any of the sex on Girls is sexy at
sexy.
all. Like, first of all, like, Lena Dunham is naked for entirely inexplicable reasons all the time. Like, it's not like Dunham's boobs are not like for sexuality. They're just like out over the course of the show because they're just like a part of her
But we
body.
could never say it because it's like she's doing it to herself. So nobody's like exploitation because
Yeah.
she was like in charge. So
No, no,
she
no.
did it
Yeah, she
because
was
she
literally
wanted to
running the
do it.
show. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
and the show was about like girls in their 20s, some that
Yeah.
were like exploring their life in their 20s. Like, yeah, women in their 20s had sex sometimes, but also accurate to the experience. It's a lot of weird, awkward sex with weird dudes that like after the fact you're like,
Baby Adam
that was
Driver.
weird. Yeah. I think Adam, we can have like a whole conversation about girls, but like even Adam Driver, which I think arguably lots of women find him very sexy, in Girls, he is like peak weirdo boyfriend. He's like not sexy. He is mostly strange and looks like he smells like through the screen. Right? Like he's the sort of boy that you're like, he's probably got some BO issues. Does not wash regularly, that kind of guy. But yeah, I'm trying to think of like modern shows that have a lot of sex involved, and there's just like really isn't as much. That just
Hmm.
seems like, and I don't know what is that about? Why is only
They
one
swing. They
piece of
got
media at a time
one
able to
emergent.
accommodate sex?
There can only be one supreme Ren.
Purveyor of sexual eroticism in media,
They suck
apparently.
it out from the other medium. And yeah, now, now we're at a place with TV where we're back to pretty wholesome television. I know even to the point
Yeah.
where like Heartstopper gets a little bit of flack because it's very wholesome. It is very cute and sweet. And some people, a lot of the gays, they've gotten hypersexual as well, gay community's always been a little bit hypersexual, but they're
Well,
not
excuse
used,
me, to be clear, it's the males in the gay
well,
community that
yes.
are hypersexual
And they're not
because
used to
they're
seeing these
males.
two little cute gay boys in high school being so pure and innocent. So they're like
Yeah, of course.
scandalized. They're scandalized by these like pure little cute gay
Come
boys in high school.
on, give us some cute. We need some cute. And right, again,
I'm
I
like, leave
really
them
so
alone.
I think it's probably just like literally just the pendulum switch, and it's just like two
Yeah,
different mediums, right? It's like TV is just starting to swing out of its hypersexualization period, and so it's moved into lots of wholesome things, right? Like Ted
yeah.
Lasso, super wholesome.
Super
It's
popular. All the popular shows are
popular.
real wholesome.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We are craving wholesome, I think, in television, but I think we are craving for an hour and a half. Please don't give me two
Give us
hours.
something.
An hour and a half of a little like complication and sexy and like, oh, I don't like, right?
Yeah.
I think I'm for the comeback of sexy.
They're like
And
our like non-wholesome TV is like up Ren's alley because it's all about like serial killers and crazy people. Like that's the
yeah.
kind of like non-wholesome. If you're either going wholesome or you want to learn about serial killers and like people that are a little
Yeah.
bit off.
And again, I'm sorry, Gen Z, but this is just like the reality that millennials are we are the largest generation right now. Like we are take up the largest portion of the population. So we also have the money at the moment to be not, yeah, we have the money. I mean, the boomers have a lot of the money, but we have a
Still,
lot more money than you do. It's just like we've been out here a little bit longer. And so, like, from a marketing perspective, it makes sense that they're starting to create things that are geared towards what millennials want. And like, we want to sit at home and relax and watch something wholesome, but we want to go out on a date to a movie and see something sexy.
you know
We
what's
want to
funny
like,
is I feel like also it's just the puritanical Gen Z that are the loudest because what also became popular during Gen Z's reign is OnlyFans. So I feel like there's a subset of Gen Z or Gen Z
mhm.
who are not about the puritanical, but they're not getting what they need in the Gen Z culture. So they had to create like a space for like we need to explore ourselves, but also stay home.
And I don't
But also
know.
at
I'm
home.
reading that anxious generation, and I just have like a little bit of like anxiety over like they're already all like experimented upon within our weird social media
Well,
like behemoth that was like they were the first ones that like they grew up with social media there all the time, and so like they kind of grew up with this always on top of them virtual world. And I have a little anxiety about the fact that like the ones who are feeling sexual are the ones doing it on the in the virtual world. Like
still
they've
virtual.
commodifying their sex instead of it being a way to connect with people in real life. So again, Gen Z babies, I love you. Please go have sex
Lord,
with each other.
you hear this? And you know, now Ren, she's sitting here, she's a baby for the new generation. Shit, these millennial babies
I
watching
yes,
Gen
I think
Z,
they're
they're
working on.
probably they're about to ban all computers. Shit, these millennial parents are about to be like, there's
Oh
no
yeah,
technology in
yes,
my
yes.
house.
My child will not have a phone until at least high
I'm
school,
gonna
if
let
not
that
later.
baby live. She's gonna
She
keep
can
that
have
little
like a flip
girl.
phone so I can contact her, but if she wants to send a text message, she's gonna have to press that S button 4 times.
Lord, Rand's gonna leave that baby on the side of the road, broke down in the car, and not have no way to get
She will have a
somebody
flip
there.
phone. She will be able to call me. She will learn my
Shit.
phone number. It will
So
be stored
her
in there.
memorized phone numbers.
They
Lord,
hate the social media. It's not good for them.
all her friends are gonna be like, "What is going
But
on, girl? Why
here's
are
the
you a
thing, Larry.
ghost?"
I can't be the only millennial that's like,
Well, it's
no,
true.
you can't go on social media because then my kid is still socially isolated because they're the only one who's not on social media. So,
It's true. So
millennial
we'll see.
parents, get your kids off of social media.
They tried like Super Nanny and all them. They tried. They were like, y'all need to limit screen time and all this, but we'll see when that takes hold because it hasn't yet.
Yeah, we'll get there. I'm hoping this hoping
Like we say though,
we're really into podcasts. I'm hoping enough
yo,
podcast rounds will go through the millennial generation that will be like, yeah, we should really probably get worried about our children on these
I do
social
have to
media
say, I am a
platforms.
little bit scared though for that Gen. I'm gonna call them Gen A because I refuse to
I
say
think
that alpha bullshit.
they're alphabets.
Ain't no damn Gen Alpha. Listen, but I am scared because Gen Z is so hyper like social justice and like equality type of stuff, which I'm mostly
Yeah,
all
yeah,
about.
yeah.
But I'm really scared because
Yeah,
even
yeah, yeah. We're pro equality. We like
but
it.
there's always a swing. So I'm like,
Yes.
what's that Gen A is going to watch what Gen Z has been doing and swing against it? And I'm really hard. I'm like, please don't be like Gen
I'm
A
really
is the
hoping that they're just going to
conservative
be
generation coming up.
yeah, I'm really hoping that they're just going to be like they're going to move back into that ideology of like all people, man. We should all just be
Hippie
like
generation.
yeah, we should all be like yeah. Why are we trying to separate everybody? We should all just be like working together to build the world up together.
Well,
That's my
I
hope.
hope, Ren. Let's hope. Then
Right,
hope
because
they're not going to
they've
be
got a lot of
like,
the identitarian and like they label themselves down to
they
their
do.
like
And
core.
I will say, since we're on this topic, I do think that that has been a part of it is the representation. We've become really factioned right now in
Yeah.
representation, and
Mm.
so people are wanting to see themselves represented in ways that maybe we haven't before, which is asexual or non-romantic. And so it's been a big push in that direction as well, under the umbrella, and single people maybe that aren't interested in relationships, just in general, want to see themselves, which again, I'm all about. Look, me and Ren have been, me specifically, I'm all about I don't need romantic-ish in every
No,
fucking movie. Do you understand me? If I'm going into an action movie, I don't really need a romance. So,
I do not.
and that's the thing. We're not advocating for, don't put sex in every movie. Yeah, there is sometimes where it's like, what the hell is this? This is out of clear blue. We don't need it here, but
Yeah.
we do need it somewhere. Like a lot of these
Yes,
movies
it's
do
a
lend
part we
themselves to it.
want the full spectrum of the human
Yeah.
experience. So we want your stories that are just about
Yeah.
really incredible friendships. We want your stories that are about the complications of family. We want your stories about like families that aren't dysfunctional and that like are really incredible and
Mhm.
supportive and how that plays into the other conflicts in your life.
Gay
Like
community. It's okay to have non-dysfunction in our shit too. That's the other thing. They
it's
just want
okay
it
to just be
all.
gay and that's not the
They get
crux of the
pissed.
entire
Ooh,
story.
some
Yeah.
of these elder gays get pissed when parents are okay with their children being gay. They're like, no, that's not real life. This is too sanitized. It's like some people didn't have to go through all that. Chill. Some people did, some people
The
didn't.
millennials are all having kids now, and we're pretty okay with our kids being like whatever they are.
Look, now we're becoming the ones who are looking at the older generations like, damn, boomer, just because you got thrown out the house, not everybody did. Shit. But no.
And the thing is, we've had a lot of those stories, and that's great. But like those
Yes.
movies now exist, so we should be adding some
Yeah.
extra
That's all
that
we want.
reflect
We
the
want it
current
all.
living experience,
Ren
right?
and I are greedy. We want it all. We want the
We've
full
got
spectrum of the human experience. And
all
that
of it.
includes sex. Okay? That
Yes.
includes sex. And you know what? I do appreciate that we're letting just, even when it doesn't have sex, let sexy people be sexy. They don't
Yeah.
need to just, just let it happen. They worked hard for those bodies,
Yeah,
and
and you know
a
what?
lot of them.
Side note, let normal people be sexy too.
Let
That's my
people
next
be
thing. That's the
sexy.
next step I'd like to go. I would like someone that looks like Bruce Willis to be sexiest man alive again here. I think
You're talking
I
about, wait, are we talking about poor Bruce Willis right now? Or are we talking about
Oh,
poor
we should
Bruce?
appreciate that in his prime. Listen, my point is that we had a very we part of my again like of this discussion of sex and films is that we have these incredibly sexy people are basically asexual. You just never see them
Yeah.
actually doing anything, right? Like there really wasn't very much sex in any of those Marvel films. It was like these incredibly chiseled, beautiful people that worked really fucking hard on those bodies, and then like all of the romance plot lines were just like, and then they kiss once, and now they're that oh it got complicated off screen, and like it
And
doesn't
even
factor
look,
in. But yeah, so you have these incredibly sexy, beautiful people that are like, but then like in the 90s and the early 2000s, we had normal looking people, but they were like normal people who had sex and were like sexy and were like I said, Bruce Willis. He was like a normal looking guy, but he was a sexy, normal looking guy. So there's a lot more like typical hot people that
yeah.
we would see. And I would like that to come back as a trend as well as, just more normie looking people on screen.
All right. Well,
I don't
that was
want
a
uggos.
well,
Just kidding. I
oh,
want
we forgot to
interesting looking people. There's no
speaking of
such thing as an
interesting.
uggo. There's people
Look,
with
actually,
different.
I do love that we do right now. Actually, there's a few because we'd be remiss. We forgot to mention it in the earlier part. It's not a sexy film, but it uses sex in interesting ways. Saltburn.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
hypersexual
That
in what
Barry
it does.
Gilgan is a normal, very weird, but
A
normal
very
looking guy.
interesting guy, a interesting kind of good looking. He's not
Yeah.
ugly, but he's not conventional. He's not, Chris Hemsworth. He's interesting face.
He's not chiseled
And
down into
he
perfection.
let it all hang out on that film. He said, "All
Yeah.
right, let's go for it."
Which is was weird, but it's also like sexy. Like, oh, there's a guy who's like confident in
Okay.
his like swagger.
And you know what? And then you had the traditional Jacob Elordi, beautiful man, who the
Yes.
camera just showered in. Like that camera loved Jacob Elordi in that movie. But
He's
so
generally a gorgeous sort of specimen. I think I have problems because I saw him in the kissing booth
Euphoria.
where he's like a weird character, and then I saw him in Euphoria where he's like a fucked
I
up
was gonna say I heard
character.
his character's terrible in Euphoria. I haven't watched, but I
Yes,
heard he's a
so
horrible
swing
person.
his like evil hot guy thing is hard for me from from that perspective.
But yeah,
But
he was
but
he was
he
very
does have like
kind and
he's
lovely in Saltburn. You were
But also
like
in
waiting for
Saltburn,
him
it
to be
makes sense
terrible.
to have an insanely good-looking
Yes,
guy for that role.
that role
But then, like,
needed it.
everybody else is kind of like normal good-looking, I'd say,
Yeah.
except, well,
Well, Rosamund
Rosamund
Pike.
Pike.
I was like, wait a minute, Rosamund Mother
She's
was
a bit
also
of a goddess, but again, that's, you
uh,
know.
and she looked so fucking good in that movie. Like, come on now. She looked amazing. He looked amazing. And Barry, they made Barry look, weird because he had to be weird, but still not like unattractive. Like, I don't know. It's a
Yeah.
very good thing. I think Emerald, she's another one. I'm not sure about the screenwriting, Miss Emerald Fennell. Maybe we should work on getting other people, but you are a fabulous director. Your
Yeah.
movies are beautifully executed. Some screen issues, some the
She
scripts,
knows what she wants to, she knows the story she wants to tell. I think, Saltburn had like its issues, but like I think she did something interesting. I think
I
she
mean, I
made a
love
lot of
Saltburn.
people talk,
Well,
and
whoo, I mean, it was
I
a
think she
hot
told the
movie.
stories she wanted to tell.
A
We
southern
can talk about
promising young
Saltburns like
woman made people talk.
yeah.
So she gets the folks chatting it up about her movies. So that good on you, girl.
Yep.
Get your bag, girl.
Mhm.
And you're beautiful. Your movies are always stunning, which I always appreciate. So yeah, we're in this age. There was another person. Who was it? Paul Mescal is actually a pretty average, like interesting average kind of guy. Josh
Mhm.
O'Connor in this movie, I would say, is like not your conventional super attractive guy, but he has this wild allure to him in everything he ever said. So we have some interest. Now the key is more women that
Yes, I know the
don't
women are
fit.
always
It's always harder. So, we're trying to get that mold of like women who are not Margot Robbie seen as
yes.
sex symbols, seen as these sexual beings. And that's what Lena did try to do in the 2000s.
Yes.
But,
I would love
well,
for Lena Dunham not to be the only person that is like of that body type. There's, it's either you have very large women or you have very tiny women, and there's like just not a lot of in
yeah.
between. And I think that's a problem too, because then you get like crazy ass people posting pictures. I saw this meme on Facebook that it was like a picture of Pierce Brosnan with his wife in the 90s and then a picture
Oh
of
my
Pierce
God, I saw
Brosnan
that
with his
too.
wife today, and it was like, obviously it's some like incel douchebag that was like, reminder, you should never get married. Like, first of all, what, not have companionship for the last 25 years? Yeah, bummer. And like, she's very, very thin when he's first married to her, and now she's like voluptuous but still hot, right? She basically got like huge boobs after having kids, and she looks gorgeous. So like, but like, I think because we don't get to see enough of the in between, there's this ideology that keeps pervading of like, there is only one type of body that is attractive, and that's the one that is acceptable, and anything else in between is unhealthy, is unattractive, is like
Yeah.
gross, whatever. We need to see more normal looking women,
Women
because we've
specifically.
always had kind of a soft spot for
Yeah.
normal looking or even weird looking men, but you really just don't get that with women. And
Yeah.
that's, obviously as a society, we demand that women prioritize beauty. And so that is why. And we should work on that.
Yes. Gen Z, that is your mission.
Yes.
Kenzie, here's your mission if you choose to accept it. Uh, you've accomplished a lot of the other things we've had problems with, particularly middle-aged men in action movies having 20-year-old love interests and
You
not
killed
batting
it,
an eye.
guys.
Got it done. We nailed that one. We've gotten that pretty extinct. Except Tom Cruise. And Tom Cruise still he's going down hard. He doesn't like to let that go. But whatever. Tom Cruise doesn't like to let a lot of stuff go. But yeah, so that was it. That was our discussion on challengers and sexy film, how it's coming back, and how sexy TV has gone away, how one or the other seems to be only able to exist at one single time in
Never
history.
the tween shall rise together.
So who knows? Probably we'll have a nice little run with movies, and by 2030, they'll be extinct again, and TV will be back to being outrageous. Who knows?
Right.
The swings in media are always fun, and they'll continue to
Yes. I'm
shock us, I'm
hoping it's
sure.
a larger indicator for the just broadening in general
Yes.
of topics in films and types of films. We're moving out of the only blockbusters, only making money, only
Yeah.
reboots, only the same IP over and over again era, and getting back into film.
Yes. So let us know your thoughts on both challengers and this whole conversation, this messy, messy conversation about sex and nudity in media. Ren, where can the folks find you?
You can yell at me on X, which I think we're going to use the word X because it sounds like a porn site for this particular show at Red Manley. You can also find my website for my theater company, audaciousimmersive.com. We have a murder mystery
Ren,
accompaniment
when are we gonna get
screening.
sexy audacious?
Sexy, audacious. We're doing a Clue screening with Queer Cult Cinema Rainbow Cult. Literally that's what they do, and that's going to be on May 21st. And then we have another murder mystery coming up after that, which will run for another couple of nights. It's an original murder mystery, and then we're doing a whole bunch of stuff. So visit audaciousimmersive.com if you want to see any of the cool stuff I'm making, and if you want to yell at me, X is the place to do it.
You can find me on X over at Chili Boy YT, here on YouTube at Chili Boy Productions, or on Instagram at Chili Boy Productions. Make sure to follow our podcast because we're a little bit sporadic, y'all. I'm sorry.
We
Um,
only we only want to deliver one of our podcasts when there's something really good to talk about.
And, we're getting there. So this summer, hopefully, we have lots of fun and exciting things to talk about. We shall see what is coming down the pipeline. But to make sure you never miss us and all of our snarky rants, discussions, roundabout talks, make sure you're following us on that X platform as well as Instagram at Cinema Snarks. Thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye. Yay.